sometimes it gets so dark in here behind these eyes, I feel like the physical equivalent of a screen. If I say I am homosexual or queer, does it make you nervous? I've experienced various reactions to that rather simple disclosure in the course of my life. I sometimes wonder whether my being a queer who asserts his sexuality publicly makes some people see the word queer written across my forehead in capital letters. And I wonder whether or not that revelation prevents some from hearing anything else I might say, or whether or not it automatically discounts anything else I might say. I used to wonder where the urge to photograph came from. I mean, there are literally billions of photographs of the Eiffel Tower spread across this world. I imagine people sleep better at night having these tiny proofs of the existence of the Eiffel Tower. In the art world, photography is one of the most misunderstood mediums because the camera is accessible to almost everybody. The nature of the camera's mechanisms makes it possible never to take a bad photograph. Photography is one of the most misunderstood mediums because no one can explain in a rational way what makes a good or bad photograph other than the artist's intent. So, you can do anything or everything you want with a camera, and the art world has no precise criteria with which they can dismiss it or kill it. Are photographs little tiny windows onto the world, little quiet moments of the life flat without sound or movement or smell? Susan, what's-her-name, said that photographs are like small bits. Which is maybe true. Maybe not. Maybe such a statement reflects that person's fear of being photographed. To me, photographs are like words, and I will generally place one inside the other or put the whole bunch of them together in order to construct a free-floating sentence about the world that I witness. History is made and preserved by and for certain classes of people. A camera in some hands can preserve an alternate history. Not long ago, I had a retrospective of some of my paintings, photographs, and sculptures in the Midwest. And a university professor who teaches a class on pornography brought along his class to see my work and ask me questions. One of the students raised his hand and said that his teacher had taught him the difference between pornography and erotica, and he wanted to know what I considered the images of sexuality that I included in my work. Well, I told him that I don't think that there is a distinction in images of sexuality such as erotica and pornography. I said that some images are capable of being insulting to me because they underscore the acceptance and maintenance of straight white male erotic fantasies, of which our museums contain many examples, while excluding the diversity of sexual possibilities. Also, what may be considered erotica to me because of its familiarity with my experiences and desire, may be considered pornography to someone who still considers the human body a taboo subject. I'm beginning to believe that one of the last frontiers left for radical gesture is the imagination. At least in my ungoverned imagination, I can fuck somebody without a rubber. Or I can, in the privacy of my own skull, douse Jesse Helms with a bucket of gasoline and set his putrid ass on fire! Or I can throw Congressman William Dannemeyer off the Empire State Building! These fantasies give me a little distance from my outrage for a few minutes. They give me peace in a very hostile world. They give me strength. I've always loved my anonymity, and therein lies a contradiction, because I have always found comfort in seeing representations of my private experiences in the public environment. I find that whenever I experience representations of reality, whether it's on a gallery wall, or in a movie, or in a book, or in a spoken word performance, that the larger the range of representations, the more I feel there is room in the environment for my existence, that not the entire environment is hostile. What exactly is Helms afraid of? What image of sexuality can be so disturbing at the tail end of the 20th century? How do you consider images of violence on the evening news in comparison to an image of someone's sexuality or desire? How can a picture of rape be any more or less scandalous than a picture of two men kissing or fucking? Helms, by the way, had more of a problem that the picture of the two men on a marble tabletop were a black man and a white man than with the idea that they were engaged in an act of sexuality. What is that all about? Another crackerjack racist is going to legislate what our desires should be? It is standard practice in this country to make invisible any kind of sexual imaging other than straight male erotic fantasies. The term sex in America long ago slid into a couple of generic symbols. Mention sex to the general public, they only seem to be able to imagine a couple of heterosexual positions on a bed. There are actual laws in parts of this country preventing anything else from happening, even between consenting adults. So, people have found it necessary to define their sexuality in images, whether it's pictures or photographs or movies, in order not to disappear. Things tend to gain power by their denial. If my sexuality is denied me, then no wonder for a period of time I explored promiscuity. If I'm going to be invisible in the eyes of society, then I am going to seek my visibility. So when people tell me that when I concentrate on images of sexuality in my work, they say, well, that's better left to the bedroom. I say bullshit, because I'm completely surrounded by one form of sexuality. It's everywhere I look. It's in every ad, whether it's cigarettes or beer or whatever. It makes me feel invisible. What some people call pornography is simply a rich historical record of the sexual possibilities of diversity, made invisible for centuries in this world by organized religions. I remember when I was in second grade, learning that everyone dies. It was a blockbuster. I don't remember who told me, but I remember being so shocked that I ran down the street to every kid I saw and said, "We all died! One day we're all going to be dead!" And then I remember parents running out of the house because their kids were screaming on the front steps. I was like, "Get the hell out of here!" I was seen as a very sick kid for having told other children what I had just learned. Growing up in a violent family with a father that had a penchant for guns, killing, and violent abuse, I think I always had a strong sense of mortality. Since my diagnosis, I've tried to reject every notion of spirituality and mortality that I've carried with me through my life. I realize that all those notions are only meant to comfort one in the face of those events. If I'm heading towards a rendezvous with death, I want to experience it in as real a state as it can get. I don't want to carry around any baggage or reincarnation or any of this other shit. I want to look it square in the eye. I've always had a tendency to confront the things I'm scared of, or try to confront them, whether it's in the process of my work or my daily life. And sometimes I'm successful, and sometimes I'm not. I seem to be rejecting everyone's gestures to make me comfortable with death. I guess I'm just withdrawing from everything around me. But I think that's the only way you can go through a process like death. What I would love to dispel, if I could just wave my hand, is the whole mystique behind something like a diagnosis and this heightened sense of mortality. That suddenly this person is facing this enormous thing. It's very simple. What the person is facing is very simple. In the first few minutes after my diagnosis, I would have loved for the entire landscape to crumble in sympathy. But it didn't. Suddenly, I didn't have the luxury of time. I don't know, but it made the whole world seem a little bit more marvelous than it ever did before. It was like I found myself at a tremendous distance looking at the world that I live in. Since my diagnosis, I've realized I've spent my whole life looking at the world from the outer edges. It's usually because I've embodied something that's reprehensible to society, whether it's being a homosexual or having been a prostitute when I was a kid or having no education. And all my life I've had this desire to be accepted. But because of what my early childhood was, and because of how I view the world, the only way I could be accepted would be to deny all those things. Well, after my diagnosis, I fully gave up any desire to fit in. And I realized that all of those things that made me different, any of the ways that I was diverse, were the most interesting parts of me. I could use this diversity as a tool to gain a sense of who I was. To turn the private into something public is an action that has tremendous repercussions in the pre-invented world. The government has the job of maintaining the day-to-day illusion of the one-tribe nation. Each public disclosure of a private reality serves as a dismantling tool against this notion of the one-tribe nation. It serves to lift the curtains a little and show revealing the existence of probably millions of tribes. The term general public disintegrates. What happens next is an X-ray of civilization, an examination of its foundations. To turn the private grief for the loss of friends and strangers into something public would serve as another incredible dismantling tool. It would dispel the notion that this epidemic has a sexual orientation or a moral code. It would nullify the belief that the government and the medical community has done very much to ease the spread and advancement of this disease. One of the first steps in making the private grief public is the ritual of memorials. What I would love to see is a demonstration each time someone died of AIDS. Each time someone's lover, stranger, family, friend, or neighbor died of AIDS, they would take that person's dead body, put it in the backseat of the car, drive 100 miles to Washington, D.C., blast through the gates of the White House, come to a screeching halt in front of the White House, and dump their lifeless form on the front steps. It would be comforting to see these people, these lovers, these strangers, these neighbors, mark time and place in history in such a public way. But bottom line, this is my own sense of urgency and need. Bottom line, even a charcoal scratching done as a response to this epidemic means whole worlds to me if it is hung in public. Bottom line, each and every gesture has a reverberation that is meaningful in its diversity. Bottom line, we have to find our own means of communication. You can't depend on the mass media to reflect our needs or our states of mind. Bottom line, with enough gestures, we can deafen the satellites and lift the curtains for a brief peek at the control room. So I'm watching this thing move around in my environment, among friends and strangers. Something invisible and abstract and scary. It's like some connect-the-dots version of hell, only it's not as simple as hell. It's got no shape yet, or else I'm just blind to it, or else we're just blind to it. Or else it is just invisible until all the dots are connected. Draw a line from here to there to there to here, with all the dots being people you can see from miles around and miles above. In the windows of planes, on the tops of buildings, on ledges. But it's not this easy, it's not that abstract, because you can't shut out the smell of rotting. You can't shut out the sound of it. The sound of the man standing on the sidewalk screaming that he's going to throw himself in front of the passing automobiles because he can't stop that slowly drawn line approaching him from the distance with all the undeniability of a slow train carrying 16 tons of pressure, with all the measure and intent of crushing him. But this guy can't even get enough control over his life to throw a fit the proper way. You can't shut out the sights and sounds of death, like the people waking up in the morning with the diseases of small birds and animals. The people who have faces black with cancer sitting in restaurants. These images hurl themselves at you from the corners of a fast-paced city, and you can't even imagine death properly enough to tell this guy you understand what he's railing against. I mean, on the first day this guy found out he had this disease, he picked up a letter that had fallen on the ground that was addressed to him. He said, even something so simple as getting a letter in the mail has an entirely different meaning. If I had $1 for health care, I'd spend it on some baby, or some innocent person with some defect or illness not of their own responsibility, not some person with AIDS. Says the government healthcare official on national television, and this is in the middle of an hour-long video of people dying on screen because they cannot afford the limited drugs available that might extend their lives. And I don't even remember what this government official looked like because I reached into the screen and ripped his face in half. And I was diagnosed with AIDS recently, and this is after years of watching friends and strangers die slow, vicious, and unnecessary deaths because fags and dykes and junkies are expendable in this country. If you want to stop AIDS, shoot the queers, says a politician in Texas on the radio. And his press secretary later claims that it was a joke, and he didn't know the microphone was on. And besides, they didn't think it would hurt his chances for re-election anyway. And I wake up every morning in this killing machine called America, and I'm carrying my rage like a blood-filled egg. And there's a thin line between the inside and the outside. A thin line between thought and action. And that thin line is made up of blood and muscle and bone. And I wake up more and more from daydreams of tipping Amazonian blow darts in infected blood and spitting them at the exposed necklines of certain politicians, government healthcare officials, and those thinly disguised walking swastikas that wear religious garments over their murderous intents, and those people parading against AIDS clinics on the nightly news. There's a thin line, a very thin line. And I've been watching the images of us in the media and on people's lips all my life. The people parading against the gay parade, screaming at them, "You won't be here next year, you'll get AIDS and die!" There's a thin line, a very thin line, and as each T cell disappears from my body, it's replaced by 10 pounds of pressure and then 10 pounds of rage. And I try to focus that pressure and rage into non-violent action, but my control is starting to slip, and my hands are starting to move independent of self-restraint. America! America! America seems to understand and condone murder on a daily basis for 12, count them, 12 long years, and we're expected to quietly and politely make house in this windstorm of murder. But I say there are certain politicians that had better increase their security forces. And I say that there are certain religious leaders and government healthcare officials that had better get bigger fucking dogs and higher fucking fences and more complex security alarms for their homes. And queer bashers better start doing their work from inside howitzer tanks. Because the thin line between the inside and the outside is beginning to erode, and at the moment, I am a 37-foot tall, 1,172-pound man inside this 6-foot body, and all I can feel is the pressure. All I can feel is the pressure and the need for release. Sometimes I come to hate people because they can't see where I am. I've gone empty, completely empty. And all they see is the visual form, my face, my legs and arms, my height and posture, sounds that are coming out of my throat, but I'm fucking empty. The person I was just 1 year ago no longer exists, drifts spinning behind me somewhere into the ether. I'm a Xerox of my former self. I can't abstract my own dying any longer. I'm a stranger to others and to myself, and I refuse to pretend that I am familiar or that I have a history attached to my years. I'm glass, clear, empty glass, and I see the world spinning behind and through me. I can't find what I'm looking for outside of myself any longer. It doesn't exist out there. Maybe it was only in here, but my head is glass now, and my eyes have stopped being cameras. Tape has run out. I am glass. Clear, empty glass. I feel like a window. Maybe a broken window. I'm a blank spot in a hectic civilization. I'm a dark smudge in the air that's dissipating without notice. I am vibrating in isolation among you. I am waving my invisible arms and hands. I am looking for the complete and final aperture of emptiness. I'm waving my arms. I'm waving my arms from right here. I'm disappearing. I'm disappearing, but not fast enough.